think the first thing to do is to tell your story. Be willing to be open to talk about what you've been through, where you are now, and what you want for the future.
Growing up, I saw it as I have a ticking clock, and there is so much I want to get done.
When I was born, the doctor told my parents that they heard something.
This is The 1% Heart, a podcast about the millions of people living with congenital heart defects. In this episode, our first episode, we will introduce you to the CHD experience and the supporting community. I'm your host, Drezden, and today's guest is not only a CHD patient, but a major patient advocate, Aliza Marlin. She's on the Emeritus Board of the Adult Congenital Heart Association. She's the chair of the New York City Walk for 1 in 100, also brought to you by the ACHA. And she's a wellness enthusiast and thriving creative professional. She's also an absolute ray of positivity, which is exactly what's needed when talking about such a hard topic and helps balance out my roboticness. Before we start, here's my quick disclaimer. Nothing said here constitutes medical advice. These are our own opinions. These are our own stories. And I also want to include a trigger warning as we will discuss medical-related problems and trauma. Listener discretion is always advised. With that out of the way, Aliza, I know you're incredibly busy. Thank you for being here today.
I am never so busy that I can't take time for you, and I can't take time for the CHD community and for ACHA. So really, thank you for having me. I'm so grateful to be here and have a chance to sit down and just chat with you for a little bit.
Now, my introduction to you was very, very high level. Had to be quick. Why don't you go ahead and, it was hard to trim it down enough to fit into the intro, but why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about your background and your own path through the CHD experience, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So I am in New York City right now. My apartment is right on 2nd Street. So if you hear an ambulance going by or a police car siren or anything like that, that's just part of the background of this podcast today. And I was born here. I was born on the Upper East Side. And when I was born, the doctor told my parents that they heard something. And it wasn't until I was 2 years old that I was diagnosed with aortic stenosis, which is a narrowing of the aortic valve. Luckily, I live in this great city with every single advantage. And I was referred to one of the most special people in my life, my pediatric cardiologist, Dr. Engel. And she continued to watch me. And she continued to watch my parents and my family and really kind of took care of us so that we did not worry. Right? These are major health issues, but she somehow made it feel as though we were going to be well taken care of. We got to know her. We got to know her entire staff. I had my first surgery at 8 years old, which was a valvotomy to stretch the aortic valve. And then I had two more valvotomies at the hospital where I had my pediatric care. And then my pediatric cardiologist, she retired. And I moved to a different pediatric cardiologist at the same hospital. And then that person left. And then I moved to a different pediatric cardiologist, and then that person retired as well. So at that point, I was like 20, 21, 22. And my parents and I decided, okay, we've got to go and we've got to find a new cardiologist. And all during this time, I was in care regularly. I had yearly appointments because I had had surgery 3 times by that point. And I loved seeing them. They made it a special day for me. They were honest. They were truthful to me. And I always knew that I was getting exceptional care. But then there was nobody left there. And we went on a search and we interviewed every pediatric cardiologist in New York City. And I called Columbia and I called the pediatric cardiologist there. And I don't even know how this happened, but he answered the phone. And I said, "Can I come see you?" And he said, "No, but you can go see my colleague. He is an adult specialist for those with CHDs." He was the only person in town, the only medical center that even recommended that. My parents and I went to interview with him in this tiny little room where he had a desk and sat next to his assistant. The exam room was literally next to his desk. The luxury was that there was a bathroom in there. I had an exam and I was lucky enough to easily, flawlessly transition into adult congenital care. And I've been with that doctor probably 30 plus years now. With him, not long after I started with him, I did have the Ross procedure, which is a procedure to take the pulmonary valve and put it in the aortic place. And I now have a donor valve in the pulmonary place. And then I had endocarditis several years later. I had a replacement pulmonary valve because the pulmonary valve was infected. Luckily, all my surgeries at my current hospital were with the same surgeon, and I've always been set up very well for success in my CHD journey. And I know that that is not the case for a lot of people. So that's kind of my origin story of where the scars come from. But I'm pretty proud of them. What's interesting is that my scar, instead of going up and down, the very first scar I ever got went underneath the breasts. So it looks like a V. And in fact, it looks like the inside. And subsequently, I had the traditional scar up and down. So the center of my chest looks like a peace sign. So I feel like that's auspicious.
Very fitting for your personality, I'd say.
That's the way I look at it. Yep.
My chest is a little bit indented from the open heart, so I always compared myself to Iron Man with the reactor in his chest.
Oh, well, it sounds like you're going to get some hardware sometime soon, or at least a tattoo of hardware.
That is on the to-do list.
Yeah.
But something you said that stuck out to me was your smooth transition from pediatric to adult care. But it sounds like your time in pediatric care from birth to age 20, everyone kept retiring.
That's absolutely true. My first doctor and then my second doctor moved on to a different medical center. The third doctor retired. At the time, the specialty, I don't know that I could tell you that there was anybody in the United States that was a certified adult congenital heart defect specialist. I think there was just this one at Columbia Presbyterian, and I don't even know how long his practice had been going, because I think he had been working with the pediatric side of things until he actually had his own clinic.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
But it was warm handoffs. Each doctor you went to had your case files, and it was a smooth transition because they were either in the same practice or in a close enough practice.
That's absolutely right. And so this is, 1993, we had very large medical centers. We have had very large medical centers where there never was, I can say, from the day I was in CHD care, pediatric cardiologists at my medical center, there were multiples. There were many of them, and they worked as a team because it was a teaching hospital. So there was always somebody for my care.
Now that we understand what a good transition looks like, I'm going to briefly tell my story to give a comparison, because a big part of what we're doing here is raising awareness, because there needs to be a fail-safe to keep patients in care. I mean, what is it? More than half of patients are lost to care between age 12 and 18.
Yeah.
So any benefit we can get from this is comparing what proper transition of care looks like. And it's actually probably a good thing that so many of your cardiologists retired or moved on, because it shows us that you can change doctors without it being a kerfuffle. Let's use that word.
That's a good word.
I'll keep it PC for now. But
that's a good word. I really am curious to hear your story, Drezden, because part of what keeps me going and what keeps me, passionate and empowered and optimistic about all this is knowing that it is possible to get people back into care. We just have to find them. We just have to give them the tools and make sure that across the United States, across the world, but let's at least start with the United States, there is care for people to get to, and that we make it easy.
And we make them aware. I mean, awareness of this problem. I'll dive right in. So you mentioned you had aortic valve stenosis.
Sure.
So I had pulmonic valve stenosis and a VSD, both corrected through open heart at 6 months old. So that would have been early 1996. 2 years after that, they found narrowing of the pulmonary artery, so not the valve, and they put a stent in. And after that healed, I had limitations, but I was pretty much seen as good to go. It was like the problem had been taken care of. And I had the added benefit of, I had a little brother who was barely a year and a half younger than me. We did everything together. We were both very active. We did sports. There were some sports I wasn't allowed to do. They wouldn't let me play football. So I went and I was a coach. I was the same age as these kids, but I was a coach or a helper in a way. My cardiologists kept changing. I had, after my operations, I had one cardiologist for most of my early childhood, and we thought he was very good at his job. He never told us about the CHD community. He never told me really what a CHD was. And finally, when I was preteen, but between the ages 10 and 13, we went to a meeting there. I asked him why I couldn't play football. He said, well, by the time you actually got good at it, you'd have to stop. So I could have been playing the entire time, which was a bit upsetting. And then he did something that could have been seen as a innocent mistake, but I believe it was a sexual advance towards my father. Just a casual little comment.
Right.
So we switched, and he retired shortly thereafter. And that started the process of, okay, we didn't have a good cardiologist, we think. We don't know for sure. He might have been great. But we had to go find care. And I can't tell you the name of a single cardiologist I had up until probably 21, 22, because we just kept changing. I'd go to an appointment, and the next appointment would be a different doctor. And they'd have to they'd be in front of me, refreshing themselves on my file. My last meeting with a pediatric cardiologist was a very smart gentleman. And I don't remember his name either, because after I had to get another stent. They tried to enlarge my stent. It fractured. They put another one inside of it. So I have two stents, but in the same spot, holding it open in the pulmonary artery. And then he moved to Wisconsin. We knew that going in, but he was still one of the best surgeons around. And at that point, I was 16, 17. And the comment I always make here is, this is when it all really hit me, because in my head, not only was the heart problems table stakes, but we've made it was kind of like a fun thing. When people would ask me, what happened, me and my brother would see what kind of outrageous lie we could get away with.
Tell me what your best one was, Drezden, because I have a good one too.
Shark attack. No, only one person believed that one, which was funny because we were in Arizona, which lacks any ocean. And the person who believed it wasn't too smart, but it was fun.
That's a very good one. I told everybody my sister bit me. She is still mad at me.
I could have blamed it on my brother. That is a great point.
Hashtag,
if he ever hears this, I'm going to blame him.
Hashtag lost opportunity.
We still have the opportunity. He's still a jokester. But I always say that's when I realized how alone me and my family really were. I remember my mom, it was just an overnight in the hospital after the surgery. And I remember my mom silently sobbing in the corner of the room and then lying to me about it. And I remember as we were getting ready for the surgery, just the fear and apprehension in her and my dad's faces. I was an arrogant teenage SOB, and I started making jokes to try to lighten the mood. And I think that made it a lot worse. And that's kind of my, oh, this is a serious thing moment. Because to me, it was just, oh, it's another heart operation. I'll be fine. And I almost didn't take it seriously afterwards either, because after that, I was in pretty good shape. I worked out a lot in high school. And after they opened up that blood flow, there was like a solid month where I felt like a god. I felt like a hero. I almost ripped my stitches on the leg, because they went through the leg cardiac catheterization, because I went to the gym and did the stair stepper, and without realizing it, I did like 3 miles just going. But we then had to find care, and because I was full size, I don't know if we were told or we assumed that we could go get adult care. And I started going to the same cardiologist as my dad. And I was always the youngest person in the room. He would spend his time finding the best of the best guys that went to Harvard. And all we really knew was pedigree. And then we didn't get quality CHD care. And then I moved to Nashville for grad school at Vanderbilt. I got COVID because I moved out here right in the middle of COVID in June of 20. And I got a doctor appointment after to make sure that everything was okay. And she said, by the way, because you have a heart history, we have a cardiologist here that would be great for you to see. And it was an ACHD clinic. I didn't know that existed. And that's when I started looking online. And that's when I found I found an English podcast while I was waiting for my cardiologist appointment that introduced me to the American CHD community, which is a freaking wild sentence to say out loud, just the
Right.
way everything comes back around. But honestly, I was basically lost to care at that point. I had gotten my last checkup in Arizona. I came out here and I figured I'd find a cardiologist wherever I landed after school. And if it wasn't for getting COVID and having a doctor going, take this seriously, I would have been lost to care. So that's how a transition shouldn't go. Because I never had a warm transfer. I would just have to find a new cardiologist every time my insurance changed or every time the insurance, renewed and they didn't negotiate with the same doctor.
I just think, so those circumstances are infuriating, right? And there's so many reasons why that happened, right? And it because your parents, you did the research, you looked for the cardiologist. I know people who were in pediatric cardiology care, fell out of care, end up with an acquired cardiologist who manages like older people and, people who need bypass and all that, TAVR valves, all those circumstances. And those cardiologists will take on a CHD patient, even if they're in a city or a location where it is easy to get ACHD care, and just think that they can handle it. The anatomy is so vastly different. So there's so many things that go into people not being in the appropriate care. And the key to it is awareness and communication. And that is 100% possible.
It's funny that's always my big culminating line is something along the lines of, it didn't need to be that way.
Right.
And I never really thought about how all these cardiologists, the acquired cardiologists, the old people doctors, always took me on as a patient.
Yeah.
Every cardiologist I had up until I came to Vanderbilt was an adult cardiologist, and no one ever told me. I never knew there was a difference between acquired and congenital heart defects until I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
That is a wild sense considering how many heart surgeries I've had.
Yeah.
And it didn't need to be this way. A lot of people say, I like talking to other advocates, and I'll get compliments on, I'm so passionate, I'm so positive. And I say straight-faced, spite is a powerful motivator.
Yeah.
I got the short end of the stick. My family got the short end of the stick. I can still see how it affects my parents. And it didn't have to be that way. So anytime it's happening to someone now, and we don't do something to stop it, it's on us. Knowing how bad it can be. And I'm not saying I had it that bad. It was just not how it should have been, how it should have.
Gosh.
Knowing how it could be, how it should be. Anytime a kid gets lost to care now or has a poor transition, the whole community should think twice.
And what is fascinating between the two of us is that from these polar opposite places, we have found our way to the same spot, right? Like we have found our way to understanding that everybody should have what I have now, without question. For my the reason I had my last surgery was because I had endocarditis. And at the time I was in my mid-40s and I wasn't feeling well. I was slowing down. And to be honest with you, I really thought I was just getting older. I thought, okay, this is what aging looks like, because we're not in bodies that don't have CHDs. So we don't know what it feels like to be without it. And to be frank with you, I'm pretty grateful for it because it makes me unique. However, I didn't understand. I went to a gastroenterologist because I was coughing. I went to my GP. They thought it was like reflux or something. I actually even called, finally, after months of slowing down, feeling like walking a block was like climbing Mount Everest. Coming out of the subway stairs was insane. I called my cardiologist, my CHD specialist. I spoke to the nurse practitioner there, and she said, this really does sound gastro, because I was coughing. And I said, I'm just going to come up there today. And I went up there. And I sat in a room. My doctor walks in. I tell him, maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes of what's going on. And he tells me, you have an infection. Okay. I had
no blood test, no other check. He just said, Q&A.
He said, you have an infection. And then he sent me for blood tests, sent me to see the infectious disease guy. He did all the things. But his first initial reaction was, you have an infection. think it's endocarditis. And then he sent me for the test, and he was absolutely right. I ended up staying in the hospital almost a month right before Christmas for IV antibiotics and to try and get me like back to a point where I could function. And while I was there, it just so happens my dad had acquired heart disease, and I moved his care to Columbia, the same hospital as well. My CHD specialist and general cardiology are on the same floor. So because I was there a month, I was given a few privileges in that I could walk around a little bit because I wasn't feeling sick, and I needed to get up out of bed. I needed to not be sitting down all day. So they let me kind of walk around, maybe go down to the cafeteria, get something other than hospital food. While I was down there, I saw my dad's cardiologist, and he said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Oh, I've taken up residency here. I'm here for a month." And I said, "This is what's going on." And he said, I'm so glad that they caught it. That's so wonderful." He said, "If you had been my patient, immediately I would have said, this is not my area of expertise, and you need to see a specialist for this." And I thought to myself, I wish that is the circumstance for everybody, because I know far too many people whose acquired cardiologists, in the case of a CHD, try to be a superhero. And it can be terrible.
But how many doctors you had doctor's appointments with gastroenterologists and you spoke to the PA?
Yes.
I mean, how many doctors did the same thing, but until you made the decision?
I think it was like 4. And I choose all my care at the hospital where my CHD doctor is so that they can see all of my files. And they saw it, they knew it, but nobody thought it was cardiac related. And it took a lot to be an advocate for myself to say, something is not right. I've exhausted all these other things, and even I didn't realize it. I just thought, okay, I've been to everybody else. Let's go to the smartest guy in the room.
And I think a lot of that is even in the medical community, it's a perception issue. A lot of people see these heart operations like appendicitis or a hernia, where you fix it and you move on with your life. I had a tricep rupture and they had to stitch it back on my arm. And, it was a long recovery, 6 months in a cast and a brace. And then I asked the doctor, like, okay, do I have to come back in 6 months, a year? He goes, no, you're good. I fixed it up. You can move your arm. I mean, it's not going to happen again. I put enough Kevlar in there. And that was it. But that's how they seem to treat these heart conditions.
Yeah.
And it's not the same. It really isn't. Because when you do get tired and all these doctors are brushing you off, and we're not even going to get into how often female voices are brushed off by their doctors, because that's a whole other conversation. Even when you make these comments, they don't look at the file like they should. Or they don't understand, even if they look at your history, they don't look at it as if it's an ongoing problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm lucky in my community because I'm so involved in the New York City area with ACHA. And, frankly, I'm a pushy New Yorker. So I say what I feel. I talk to people. I develop relationships. But I see people who are volunteers and want to get more involved and want to understand more people. And they go to their doctor's appointments and, they don't get their questions answered. And,
They don't get their questions answered.
yeah, people need to learn how to push enough to get your questions answered, because there's nothing more debilitating than leaving an appointment and not having your questions answered.
And answered in a way that makes sense.
Yeah.
When I had that interview on the English podcast all those years ago, I actually messaged my cardiologist right before saying, hey, what were my issues again? Because I honestly did not know. I knew the terms, and he described them like I took a screenshot of the message because he described it in a way that made sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't had, either the doctors didn't tell me, or, you want to talk about being brushed off. Before I came out to Nashville, I took a stress test with my other doctor. And it's very funny to imagine this in his very thick Western European accent. And he gets the results back, and we're sitting there, and he's like, okay, good results, yada, yada. And I go, so no fault, like, should we be worried? Is there anything we should check? And he goes, oh, numbers like this, you're going to live forever. Again, sounds much better in like a German accent. But that was the kind of brush off I got. Because you don't look sick. I was healthy. But then I come out to Vanderbilt, and my current cardiologist, he wanted to do a stress test a couple years ago. And I said, well, I don't want to pay for that because it's not cheap. And he said, well, if you do it now, since your heart is different, it's special, it's got different kinds of pressures and different kinds of things that have happened because of those operations. You do this test now, and then if in 6 months, a year, 6 years, 60 years, when something is different, you do the test again, and I can compare the two results, because I can't compare you to a normal patient. I can't compare you. There's not someone that has your 3 defects anywhere around. And even if there was, they won't have your defects and your same activity level. Could be more, could be less. So that was really a wake-up call to, that's how I should have been considered for the first 21 years of my life.
Yeah. And it's really hard. You go in trying to be optimistic with something like that, and you have this experience behind you. And even though you walk in thinking, okay, I'm going to try and grow beyond that in terms of the way I look at things, my perspective. And when you hear things like that, it's a struggle to remain optimistic.
Then CHD patients are still so positive. I was at a conference recently, and they were talking about how patients in heart failure, actively dying, patients in heart failure, still rated their quality of life as pretty damn good.
What do you think that is about us?
I think, and I spoke about this with a friend of mine over in the UK not too long ago, but I think having, and excuse the crude language here, having a ticking time bomb in your chest makes you realize how fucking lucky you are all the time. I mean, I never knew anything different. All I knew is every time I take my shirt off and get ready in the morning, I see the scar. Anytime I get a weird palpitation or a twitch in my arm that's not normal, my first thought is that going to be a thing? No? Okay, we're good. But it's kind of that ever-present reminder that every second I'm here, I got to take advantage. I should be grateful for is the more copacetic and mature way to look at it. But growing up, I saw it as I have a ticking clock, and then there is so much I want to get done. And I worked full-time through high school and college. I learned to be a professional chef. I rode motorcycles. I did everything possible to make sure that I didn't, I maximized the time I got. And it still never occurred to me that no one told me, like, hey, you're going to live a normal life. I had a doctor who was also my mother's brother. He's since lost his license, but I went to physical with him 1 year when I was growing up, like 14 years old. And this genius mixed up the terms congenital and terminal.
Oh, God.
And instead of correcting himself, when I call him, like, you don't mean congenital? He goes, well, I mean, eventually it's going to get you. Yeah, don't worry. I don't think he's in practice anymore, but that was a very fun conversation.
Well, he belongs in a hole somewhere.
I'm very happy my dad didn't do that.
Me too. Me too. I completely agree with you. I am so extraordinarily grateful for every day I get. I'm a huge, and Libra brother, I'm a huge fan of birthdays. We're only, our birthdays are only like 2 weeks apart or so. So I'm a huge fan of birthdays. I get excited, particularly mine. I like everybody's birthday, but particularly my own. I get excited. I realize I work really hard. I've done a lot to get to my next year. I should celebrate it. I'm 56 now. I think 56 is wonderful, and I'm expecting 30, 35, as many years as I have. I'm expecting them to be full and wonderful and continuing to be like passionate. But I do think that is something about a CHD patient that we tend to see our lives as how full can they be? Because that's what's going to bring me the most joy. I'm also a registered yoga teacher as well. And as we were learning, as I was in my training, one of the things that has always stuck with me is that yogis measure your life in the breaths that you take, not in the days or the years that you count. So if you can make those breaths bigger, your life will be long. And that's kind of the way I look at life, right? I'm just going to make those breaths bigger, and therefore I'm going to live a long time. And The bigger I can make those breaths, the more space I'm giving my heart, whatever that anatomy is about, to expand and to thrive. It's giving me more time. And I'm going to use that time.
It's funny. This ties back to how you and I had very different journeys and ended up the same kind of advocacy, the same kind of path. I have a very similar perspective from a much different. I also think what I should maximize my time, but that's because I am a finance pro. I have a master's in finance. I work in private equity, and I like to sit here and go, I only get a certain number of minutes. I'm going to maximize the return on my investment here. And let me tell you, I'm doing everything I possibly can to maximize that return. But I like the yoga analogy better. The depth and length of the breaths sounds a lot better than maximizing my investment on my life.
We can talk about the ROI of the breath. That's also okay. We can combine them. I'm willing to cut the middle ground.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Sorry. Okay. We are well over time. I'll just speed up the podcast to squeeze it all into a little episode. Too much good stuff to cut. You are someone listening to this podcast now. You are motivated, energized to do something. You're a patient, you're a parent, you're a friend, you're a medical student who's like, wow, I should do something with CHD. What do we do? Where do they go?
I think the first thing to do is to tell your story. Be willing to be open to talk about what you've been through, where you are now, and what you want for the future. I really resisted that for a long time. Even when I first was a volunteer with ACHA and I first was co-chairing the New York City walk, I thought, okay, I can hide behind my ability to plan things. And perhaps if I just plan things, people won't ask about my story. And I'll blend in and somebody will think I'm a parent, right? And then I met all of these people who were willing to be vulnerable and willing to tell their story and willing to talk about what was going on in their lives. And I thought, that's amazing. And I want to do that. And I think if I can talk about where I come from and what my experience is, if somebody who's had the same experience but never met anybody can feel more powerful and more empowered, and if somebody who hasn't had all the things that I've had and the care that I've been given and the success with my surgeries and my life, then that gives them an avenue to find that, right? It opens up this world for people who don't have it and empowers people who already have it. And that's the only way. Just tell your story. Take one moment, take a deep breath, be willing to be vulnerable for just one moment. And if it just helps one person, then that's a win.
Again, it's the same result from two different journeys. That everything, even with this podcast, it's that vulnerability, telling your story, because if it helps one person, it's all worth it. But mine comes from a different place. I did not want to tell my story. Like I said before, my brother and I lied and had fun lying. When I went to cardiologist appointments, working even as an adult, hiding and lying, which is not a way to live. But what really motivated me was someone very much smarter than me said, you have to tell your story because someone going through it right now is experiencing that story. And wouldn't you have liked it if someone had told you how it was going to play out? Someone had given you how much easier would it have been if you had someone you could listen to? You had someone stand up there going, I'm still fucking here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I joke a lot, but there's a lot of, I don't know if it's spite, anger, or just contempt for people suffering when they don't need to be.
Mm-hmm.
Because the ACHA has the Adult Congenital Heart Association, ACHA.org, has ACHAheart.org, has a million resources that would have been amazing if I'd known they existed even as a teenager and young adult. But they exist now.
Yeah.
People going through it today don't have to go it alone. And that is my bang the table moment. Yep. Now, we are well over time, but something I want to ask everyone I talk to, and you most of all at this point, what does CHD mean to you? And I don't mean the textbook definition of malformation in the structure of the heart present at birth, yada, yada, yada. You have suffered, you have built a community, you have gone through bad things, and you have seen great things and met great people. At this point, what does CHD mean to you?
It means that I'm unique, that my heart has My heart rules what I do because it leads me in these directions that make me feel amazing. Even at my worst day, right? Day after surgery, I know that there's something special inside of me that is guiding me everywhere. And it has given me this community of people that are not just my heart group, right? It's not like they're just people that I've met because we have similar defects or because we all have defects. It's because they're genuine humans. And I think having a unique heart defect, if we want to call it that, has led me to a whole side of humanity that I would have never had in my life. And that has changed me. And it has given me the opportunity to be all in the things that mean the most to me in this lifetime. And I don't think that I don't think if I didn't have a congenital heart defect, I would have ever felt as fulfilled as I do right now. And I know that I will continue to be in the future.
I'm right there with you. I'm right there with you. A motivation that most people don't have to have, but I'm happy to be a CHD patient. As weird as that is to say out loud, because I wouldn't be me without it. I've been successful so far in my life, and it's because I've been incredibly motivated. I won't be the smartest person in the room. I won't be the most charismatic, but I'll be the one that works the hardest because I know what I have to do to get where I want to be. And I know there's a time horizon on that. And that kind of guidance really focuses the mind. And I'm happy to be a CHD patient. Now, I wish my parents had a little bit more support going through it. I wish my, transition to care was a bit better. I wish it didn't. I'm sure my dad has PTSD, and my mom, she was giving me some highlights from the parts of my story I don't remember, and had to stop because her voice started to break. I wish that part didn't happen. But there's also a lot of good and a lot of great people, yourself included, that I've met because of this. And that is something that no one can take away from me.
Drezden, don't you see? You have to go through that, right? It's shitty and it's a shame, but you have to go through that to get here, right? And that is part of the scarring of right? It's like these big little scars that are left in your heart, and it's about, watching your mom in that corner sobbing, right? It's about desperately trying to find somebody that will help you and give you answers. All those leave these little scars on your heart, and those scars make you a better voice, make you better able to help others. Throw yourself all in. My degree is in musical theater from college, and there's a lyric that it sticks with me from a musical called The Fantastics. It's called "Without a hurt, the heart is hollow." Without all of these things, we can't do what we do. We need this experience. We need your mom to sit with you now and talk to you and see her go through what she went through so that she and you and all of us can just help people and make it not that way for others.
And that's what we're trying to do. Fantastic. Telling our stories, being vulnerable, and trying to help others. I really think that's the theme of this entire episode. It's the power of our story and the power of the community. It's the power, especially the power of social media. Now you can reach out and find someone, a mentor, a friend, a group of people that's going through it, so you don't have to go it alone.
I wish you didn't go through what you went through, but I'm grateful for that experience that it's brought you and I here in this moment.
I'm happy that I did. I'll end with this. It's amor fati, a love of one's fate. The willingness to live your life exactly as it's played out, the highs and the lows, 1,000,000 times over. Because life is short, it is fleeting. We are both very aware of that. And the good is very enjoyable, but the bad is also a privilege to experience. It's a pleasure being here.
I think you have to look inward to be able to give outwardly. And you are doing that. We are doing that. And to continue to do that is going to make a huge difference in the lives of so many to be born with CHD and to see old age, right? Nobody expected that, but we're going to, because
Here's what we can end on then. I went to a conference. There was this great statistic. It was in 1988, 48% of CHD patients survived their first year of life. So just under half of us made it to a year old. By 2018, 95% of CHD patients survived their first year. And more than 2/3 are expected to make it to have made it or are expected to make it to retirement age, 65 or older. In 30 years, we've gone from 48% to 95% making it to a year old. I am happy to be born when I was, and I'm happy to be a CHD patient. But yeah, we're living longer, and now our focus needs to go from surviving to thriving. And now I will do our walk-off. And that was Aliza Marlin, a patient advocate, and someone I aspire to be as positive as. And remember, if you have any questions or comments on this episode, you can reach out through our website, 1percentheart.com, all spelled out. Email support@1percentheart.com, again, all spelled out, or message us on Instagram at the CHD Podcast. Yes, we were able to get that @ name. Thank you all for listening. Talk to you soon.